Yo, what's up idiots? idiotMOUSE here, and welcome to my solo versus squad tips, tricks, and loadout video. I'm going to start the video off with a little bit of gameplay in the background. It's a 35 kill solo squad game on Warrior, and throughout the video I'm going to be tossing in some tips and tricks that I've learned from the last couple months of playing solo versus squads. And then at the end of the video, I'll be going through some of my favorite loadouts that I've been using lately to win in solo versus squads. I want to start off by saying that just be prepared to be a little bit frustrated with solo versus squads. It's arguably the most frustrating game mode to lose. Be prepared to have a lot of 20, 25, even 30 kill games that you end up losing just because, you know, you get overrun by 4 people. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, when there's 4 bodies coming at you, sometimes there's just nothing you can do. So be prepared to lose to a couple of turrets, a couple of SMGs, a couple of players that are, you know, not as good as you, and that's totally fine. That's the challenge of solo squads. It just makes the victories that much more sweeter when you wipe out an entire console squad. So let's get ready to hop into it. We're going to start off with how I like to drop in solo versus squads. Alright guys, so dropping in solo versus squads is a little bit more different than it would be as if you were dropping in just solos. The main thing you want to keep in mind is that you do want to have ample time to loot a handful of chests. You don't want to be dropping in places that have just one chest, they're very popular, and you're at the mercy of what you find in that one chest, hopefully not, you know, an SMG or an AR. So I do usually like to drop on the outskirts of the zones that I drop in, and kind of work my way in and become the third partier rather than becoming the third partied person. I do tend to drop at Lumberfall more than any other zone, and the reason that I really enjoy this zone for solo versus squads is that, one, it's pretty big, but two, it's a lot of different terrain and a lot of different structures there that allow you to win solo versus squad fights strictly through positioning. Good examples of this are, you know, when you're on top of the forge at Lumberfall in Heaven, it's very easy to take that forge because of the high ground. It's very easy to kill a team that's in the barn in the center of Lumberfall when you're at the 2 tower area. It's really just a vast zone that, again, allows you to really outplay 4 people at the same time because of the various angles and height advantages and things like that. So in most of my solo squad games, you will see me dropping at Lumber. I typically drop towards the far away 2 towers, towards Valley, loot up there a little bit, and then make my way towards the high ground by the Twin Towers and work my way down towards the Forge. You will sometimes see me drop in what I like to call the neighbor's house, which is kind of on the low ground. It's behind the forge a little bit, the closest house behind the forge, and work my way around there. But both of these spots for me really give me a lot of time to loot. It gives me time to think about where I want to position, do a little bit of listening and hearing what people are fighting from, and kind of go from there. Additionally, in solo versus squads, I don't really play to win. I mean, I want to win, but I do want to go for high kill games more than anything. So places like, you know, Old Manor, Forbidden Swamp, more of the quiet zones, they're not really that fun for me, even though it gives me plenty of time to loot and forage and prepare for big fights. I'd rather just get into the action right away from the get-go, and Lumberfall is always pretty juicy in terms of players who drop there. You will sometimes see me dropping at Crossing if the Zeppelin goes right over Crossing. Reason being is I do find it pretty easy to get a forge off there. What I like to do is land sometimes on the forge or right to the side of the forge and try and snag one quick kill and then get off a forge for my class weapon and then kind of snowball in the zone from there. But again, that's only if the Zeppelin goes right over Crossing. For the most part, I do find myself going Lumber and having some pretty good success there through positioning. Alright, so let's say we've dropped into the zone. Now, what exactly are we looking for to kind of optimize our chances of winning 1 versus 4 fights? In terms of weapons, you do want to go for the classic revolver and slug rifle. Weapons like the AR, the SMG, even the pistol, they're usable in solos sometimes, but when you're doing a fight against 4 people, any of those weapons that you have to kind of be out in the open and constantly spam and use your entire clip to kill one person, those weapons are going to be significantly weaker in solo versus squads. So you really want to find that revolver and that slug rifle to fend off an entire team. Again, the reason the revolver and the slug rifle are so powerful is because they're more bursty, single projectile peak weapons. You can cover yourself with a rock, a tree, from a window, and just do a quick peek with your weapon and land a quick headshot for 600 damage, and that really puts a player on the back foot. So if you're hitting all your headshots, you can really kind of fend off an entire team a lot easier than if you had just an AR, which is doing an insignificant amount of damage to 4 people. Outside of that, I will take shotgun if I find it, just because again it's another kind of burstier weapon, but really try and stay away from the AR, SMG, and burst rifle, and I really try not to engage until I find at least a slug or at least a revolver. As far as abilities go, I typically find myself looking for offensive abilities like Blast Arrow, Concussive Bomb, and Firebomb, and reason being is 1, they're all AoE effects, so I can potentially damage an entire team with them. 2, they can deny certain areas from enemy teams, and what I mean by that is perhaps I'm in a building and I can firebomb the bottom floor to delay a push, which allows me to get my cooldowns back or heal a little bit further. And 3, you don't always get into 1v4 situations, you sometimes get into 1v2s when 2 guys push you, and to be able to just blast one away or bomb one away and then make it a 1v1 situation is very powerful in the early game. So those are the 3 main spells I'm looking for in terms of offense. I do often find myself as well looking for Healing Station, Healing Shout, and Flask of Healing. Pretty obviously, you're going to take a lot more damage when you're fighting 4 people rather than 1, so it is nice to have some healing on hand as well. As far as movement ability goes, the most important thing in solo versus squads, in my opinion, in terms of abilities, is going to be Soar. No matter what class I'm playing, I very frequently find myself picking up Soar as a defensive tool in case things go south. And the reason Soar is so much better than any other movement ability, which is pretty obvious, is that it allows you to fly away. So you can go through windows, you can go to the 2nd story of buildings, you can go into positions that no one can find you in unless they have a Soar themselves. But not only does Soar allow you to run away from a fight that you're potentially losing, but it's also an ability that allows you to bait people to do things that they think is a good idea, but actually isn't. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you're pushing the Fungal Forest Forge as a hunter and you have Soar, and you go in, maybe you chicken one guy that hits you for 1800 damage and you soar away and you land on a mushroom, right? Dude, what is melting? Only, you know, unless you're fighting a team of 4 mages, the mage that's in there, if there is a mage, is probably going to chase you all by herself, which allows you to capitalize on another 1v1 situation. They're thinking, oh, it's just one guy, we damaged him, just go finish him off. But in reality, you're better than that. You're gonna crush them, right? So being able to bait people into these situations where they think they have you, but they really don't, is really powerful with Soar. It's kind of a psychological warfare kind of thing you have going on with Soar. Another example of that is, say you're on Warrior and you're in Trinity Hills and you're fighting a team, you land a couple axes, they hit you, and you soar into the 2nd story of a building, and you're positioning yourself above the staircase, and you have a right angle peek on them. And they're thinking, oh my god, it's just one guy, let's all go push him together. But they're going in one at a time up the staircase, and you're just lobbing axes at them down the staircase around a corner. Like, you're baiting them into you because they think they've got you, but Soar allows you to position in a way that they really can't capitalize on, but you can, compared to, say, Heroic Leap, or Blink, or Dodge Roll, which really do nothing against a team of 4 people. But for the most part, if you find a Soar, use it, take advantage of it. Alright, so now that we know which abilities to look for in an early game, let's talk a little bit how to use them to kind of maximize your advantage and win 1 versus 4 situations. The following technique, I call it cycling abilities. I think it's one of the most underrated techniques in Realm Royale, and I think it's something that really separates beginner players from more advanced players in every single game mode. And what I mean by cycling abilities is basically being able to quickly rotate through the ability you have on your character, dropping it and picking up another ability and getting value out of that spell, and being able to recognize situations in which you can use all the things you find around you to your advantage. A great example of this that you'll often see me do is I'll put something into the forge at Lumberfall. I'll get on the high ground of Lumberfall at the on top of the forge, and there's usually 1 or 2 or 3 chests up there that I'll open up, and I'll find a bunch of different abilities, and I won't disenchant any of them. I'll leave them all there. And the reason is because when that forge lights up, everyone's noses turn up. Everyone's trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to get in there and kill that guy? And a squad's going to push you, and you want to be able to use every single ability you find to fend them off until that forge is ready so you can finish the fight off. So say you find a firebomb, a flare, an ice wall. Why can't you use the flare to see where the squad's at, then swap out to the firebomb, toss it into the forge to make sure they can't go into the forge, then pick up the ice wall, drop down into the forge, ice wall the entrance, and they can't see you, pick up your loot, and then soar away. Hopefully you found a soar by now. So that's what I mean by being able to cycle abilities. A lot of people's instincts when they first find something is to disenchant it. Oh, it's an easy 3 shards. But in reality, if you are going to be in an area where you're going to be defending a forge, or you're expecting a push, or you're in the final zone, you need to be opening chests and leaving things on the ground and making a mental note of what's there, and quickly being able to recognize scenarios in which you can use each of these abilities to your advantage. When you're fighting against 4 people, using all these different abilities is how you're going to win fights, because usually just one ability isn't enough to fend off 4 people, especially in the early game. This is also most useful with healing abilities. You'll often see me leaving a lot of healing abilities on the ground so I can rotate through them when I'm fending off enemies. And then also one tip that I've recently started doing, it's very niche. It happens, every once in a while, but it has saved my butt quite a few times. It's purposely keeping a lower rarity of Soar on your character. And the reason that I often do this is because if I'm in a zone like Trinity or Sentinel Hold, or one of the places that has a lot of houses in them, there are times where the short soar duration is not enough to get me far away. So if I kill a mage with maybe a purple soar, I'll leave that purple soar on the ground and keep my gray soar, and I'll make a mental note of it so that if someone comes and attacks me and I need to fly away, I can soar towards the purple soar and pick it up and soar again, rather than vice versa, where I'd have to drop my purple soar by going into my inventory and being stationary for a second. So cycling abilities is a really important tool that I think a lot of people underutilize. And it comes with a lot of experience. Once you get into a lot of fights early game and you start to recognize what each ability is good for, you start to recognize situations in which you can get value out of every single spell, even the ones that are traditionally bad, like Ice Wall or even Proximity Trap. So really focus when you loot on remembering what you're looting, and if you really need to disenchant it, and leaving it there and knowing where it's at. Alright, so we have survived the early game, we've forged. It's time to start thinking about how we're going to rotate to find more squads to kill. There's a couple things I like to keep in mind before I move on to my next point of interest. The first thing is, what exactly is my loadout? If, I'm a hunter and I have dodge roll, I'm probably not going to go to Fungal Jungle, because pushing that forge is pretty tough unless I have Soar. And most of the time I do like to push towards Valley. If you watch my second tips and tricks video, you'll notice I do have a really good way to take the forge in Valley that very rarely fails. Check that video out. So I'm very comfortable solo squatting in Valley, so frequently I go from Lumber to Valley. If I'm Mage or I find a Soar, I don't mind taking Fungal, because it allows me to push the forge, get a kill, soar away, reset, heal, and then repeat. But zones like Old Manor, Crossing, Outpost, these zones seem like they're very well designed, but they are very tough to take for someone that is solo squatting against an entire team that might be a little bit coordinated. You really want to be able to go into areas where you are able to, 1, have a right side peek, 2, have a way to get away, and 3, just have a lot of cover. A zone like Old Manor, when you push that forge, you really have a lot of cover. It's kind of an open forge. Outpost, it's very tiny. If you push in there, you got 4 guys on top of you, and frequently another team shows up from the hills and third parties you. So I tend to stay away from the harder to take zones and tend to go more towards zones that I'm very comfortable with, because I have ways to attack the forge that are kind of unexpected, like in Valley, or to get away in, like Fungal. Another thing I like to base my rotations on is Zeppelin chests. For me, when I play solo versus squads, I don't tend to forge that much. I really do want to focus more on high kill games. Sometimes, I just want to take it easy and I'll forge more runes, but most of the time, I find myself just going from place to place to find people. So I do like to base some of my rotations on where I see Zeppelin chests landing. Make sure to put a mark on the minimap if a Zeppelin chest does drop, so you know in case someone takes it exactly where it's at, and you can expect a fight there. But Zeppelin chests are important because it allows you to get more resources to fight in solo versus squads, and runes can be absolutely game-winning. I mean, finding a lifesteal rune on warrior, it's pretty hard to lose, or finding a weapon damage when you have a purple bow, it's a pretty big deal. So Zeppelin chests I find very important. Goblins, I do go for sometimes if they're convenient, but a lot of the time, I do like to save time and just go for kills, so I kind of ignore the goblins. But for the most part, base your rotations around zones that you are comfortable in. zones that synergize with your loadout, not zones that could be very create a big struggle for you to kind of take over. So we've been talking a lot about rotations and positioning and things to look for, but one of the biggest questions is how exactly do you win a 1 versus 4 fight? And the main thing this comes down to is just angling people off. It's not as easy as it sounds, but the more you learn the map, the better you'll get at it. And what that means basically is, say an entire team of 4 people are pushing you. You need to be able to position yourself in a place where you can use cover, say a rock or a tree, to block out 3 enemies and only focus on 1. And what this does, obviously, is 1, prevents damage that you're taking, but allows you to apply pressure on a single person and maybe chicken them, and then go and focus on the other people. It's kind of a balancing act. Even if you chicken someone, you don't necessarily want to finish the chicken right away. You need to be making sure no one's pushing you and pinching you from 2 sides. It really comes down to, again, map knowledge and knowing how long it takes the enemy to travel to you, making sure you hit your shots, which is why we're doing solo squads in the first place, to really get better at hitting shots under pressure. But just being able to know how to apply pressure to one person, swap to the next person, and constantly keep the enemies on the back foot. Even though there are 4 of them, a lot of the time if you're hitting your shots, they start to panic. They expect more than just 1 person. So if you can be doing this balancing act of headshotting here, throw an axe there, and constantly whittling them down, eventually the fight gets to a point where you can just jump on top of that rock you're using for cover and one-shot every single one of them. So you really need to focus again on positioning yourself in places where you do have that cover, where you do have a house, or you do have a right side angle peek, where you can pretty easily shoot at 1 person at a time instead of being visible to 4 people at a time. Additionally, you do want to have an escape plan. Again, a lot of the time you want to be running Soar. Try your best not to be fighting out in the open like on the hills and the deserts, because Soar has no value there. There's nowhere you can soar to prevent them from chasing you. You want to be fighting in places that have windows, second stories, weird structures to land on top of so you can heal. Really focus on learning the map and learning positions you can get into to successfully prevent them from pushing you. Awesome. So now that we've kind of gone through some tips and tricks for solo versus squads, let's talk a little bit about some of the loadouts that I think are really strong for that game mode. The first one's going to be a warrior loadout, and I think this might be the best loadout for solo versus squads currently for high kill games, because it's really carried by the strength of the throwing axe. And the throwing axe is really strong in solo versus squads for a handful of reasons. 1, you never have to reload, so you're never on the back foot. You're able to constantly chuck axes at your opponent, keeping them on the back foot. 2, it's the highest DPS weapon in the game, and it's single projectile, meaning it's insanely strong for peeking around corners like rocks, trees, inside of houses at close range. So it allows you to really, again, apply a lot of pressure very quickly to your enemies. And 3rd, it can one-shot chickens at the legendary level, which is a pretty big deal as long as they don't have the chicken HP rune, because it allows you, again, to spend more time fighting actual opponents than chickens and having to, spend 2 or 3 bullets to kill them. So we're going to go ahead and start with the Forge Throwing Axe talent. We take Warrior's Arsenal over the other axe talent because Game Grover is pretty weak. I do take Inspire, which allows us to have a little bit of burst healing throughout the entire game. The real strength of this comes from early game when you find a gray or green healing shout, and healing can be pretty sparse, so having this 400 burst healing is really powerful. I do take Brutality to make Heroic Leap, deal 600 damage on impact, and again, this is primarily an early game. That's the reason I take it, is for the early game. I don't find myself Heroic Leaping onto enemies in the late game because there's 4 of them. That's pretty much a death sentence, but early game, if you hit a bunch of enemies for 600, 700, 800 damage, and then you can leap on them, and you do 600 damage to all 4 of them, that's pretty strong. So a lot of this loadout is based around surviving the early game, whether it be healing or doing AoE damage. In the late game with this loadout, I do find myself replacing Healing Shout with Barricade, if I do find one. My philosophy behind that is that if you just prevent the damage that you're going to be taking, you don't need to heal anyway. And Barricade really does synergize well with the Throwing Axe, because you can just dance back and forth between the 2 different sides of the barricade, and you never really have to ADS your axe ever. So Barricade is really powerful on Warrior. It gives you enough time to chuck, a handful of axes and take out an entire team. So late game, I do replace this with Barricade. And again, I never find myself forging Heroic Leap because I do ideally find a soar to use, again, to reposition, as I mentioned earlier, being able to soar to the second story of a house or something, and then the whole team comes chasing you. You toss axes down the hallway and you're just lighting them up. It's just a really powerful combo. So this is what I would run for warrior. I run vigor and bok bucks no matter what class I'm playing or no matter what game mode. And I would say there is a little bit of room for changing around these two talents, chicken run and master riding. The reason I run chicken run is because if you're fighting 4 people at the same time, using chicken timer to reduce your chicken timer doesn't really do much if you can't get away anyway. So the way I see it is when you're fighting 4 people, chicken run really is your only way to get away from an entire squad and kind of use some jukes to get away. You can swap for incubation if you find yourself forging pretty frequently, but again, I don't find myself forging that much. So this is primarily if you're going to be forging more runes and you really want to try and find that chicken timer rune. But aside from that, I do think chicken run is the play for solo versus squads. I personally run master riding for solo versus squads because I'm going for very high kill games. So I want to be able to move from zone to zone very quickly. But I would say if you're just starting in solo versus squads, go ahead and take leg day, just because it provides a little bit more defensiveness, I guess, to your gameplay, because you can move a little bit faster or catch chickens a little bit easier. But as I progressed through solo squads and got better and better at it, I found myself wanting to find more teams faster and missing out on kills, so master riding was what I swapped to. The next loadout that was really strong for me lately has been a mage with the stone staff talent. This loadout, I don't know if it's really that easy to get high kill games with, but it is pretty easy to win with, primarily because you have a long distance soar, and then you can heal up. So the main strategy with this loadout is to basically find a squad, pick one person off, soar away, heal up, go back in and repeat. And so because of that, the fights are really drawn out. They take a lot longer, which is why I don't think you can get as many high kill games with this loadout. Stone staff is really strong. However, it only has 5 bullets, so you find yourself reloading a lot, which means, again, you are frequently on the back foot because teams are pushing you as you reload. So that's why we focus on using high flyer to be able to get away as soon as you kill somebody, and then the ability to, again, forge a healing station and heal yourself up when you escape. Some people have asked, why don't I use the 15% damage reduction talent called Alchemic Ward with the healing station? And again, I find myself wanting to use healing station more frequently rather than during a fight, because I find myself soaring away and healing up. So there's really no reason for me to take the damage reduction when I'm going to be flying away anyway and healing. I'd rather have more frequent healing totems. Aside from that, the main strategy, again, you pick someone off, you fly away, you heal up, you go and you do it again. I like Strength of Stone because I like to try and operate at optimal play. What that means is I'm just going to assume that I can hit all my shots and get that extra bonus damage. But if you are still learning the Stone Staff, if you are still not the best with the Stone Staff, you can run Mage's Arsenal to get that guaranteed damage all the time. But I prefer a little bit of the extra burst with the Strength of Stone. Same talents as Warrior. Again, a very strong loadout, but probably not going to be able to get as many kills as the Warrior loadout because you have to spend time reloading, running away, fights are really drawn out. But you can definitely win a lot of games with this loadout. The next loadout I like for solo versus squads is a Hunter loadout. It's just your classic recurve longbow loadout. The main strength from this loadout comes from the fact that you can, if you find a legendary bow, you can one-shot chickens, and you can insta-chicken people if you hit a headshot. The legendary longbow hits for a 1600 damage headshot, so if people aren't running vigor, they get popped instantly. And if you find a headshot rune, it actually headshots for 1800. So even if they have vigor and no armor, you can completely chicken them with just one shot. This is probably the weaker of the 3 loadouts in my opinion, strictly because you don't have as much DPS. The longbow isn't a high DPS weapon, it's a very burst-like weapon. So you really need to land your shots with this loadout, and you really want to be hitting headshots because it's very easy to get overrun. I do prefer flare over blast arrow on Hunter, especially in solo versus squads. I find it very important to be able to know exactly where all 4 of my enemies are coming from, if they're healing, if they're pushing, if I can peek, whereas blast arrow gives me, 1 knockback per fight, whereas flare allows me to get a lot more value throughout the entire fight. So you can try blast arrow, it's not bad, I just don't think it's optimal. Flare allows me to line up headshots as well, which again are very crucial in solo versus squads. Hunter is the one class I will consider keeping their default movement ability. Well, I guess Soar is a default movement ability for Mage, but Warrior and Assassin I use Soar. But sometimes I'll keep Desert Shadow and Withdraw depending on where the zone is heading. Desert Shadow combined with Withdraw is not a bad movement ability. It actually does allow you to escape from squads with relative success, reposition sneakily, and get another free shot on people, another free headshot. So it's not a bad talent to have in the end game in solo versus squads. However, you do again lack that ability to reposition onto high ground, so you have to be very much more zone conscious and know where the zone is going and how to position within it. But again, sometimes I do find myself taking Soar, so keep that in mind, keep an eye on the map and see where the zone's heading and kind of go from there. As far as Assassin goes, I don't typically play Assassin in solo versus squads. I don't think it's particularly strong in solo versus squads. Right now, Assassin to me is a single target damaging class, with things like concussive grenades, sniper rifle having a long reload, and your other two weapons being just kind of spam guns. So I do think Assassin is the worst for solo versus squads, so I wouldn't recommend it. If you're just starting out, I would recommend Warrior, then Mage, and then Hunter. They're all very strong. Alright guys, well that about wraps it up for my solo versus squads tips and tricks video. I do really enjoy solo versus squads. It's my favorite way to play the game right now. So if you guys have any questions, any comments, let me know. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have. Also, I'm going to put some bonus tips in the description down below in the YouTube video. So if you want to have a couple more quick tips about solo versus squads, make sure you click the description down below and take a look. But aside from that, thank you guys very much for tuning in, and I will see you guys in the next video.